She had set it to Seld at the placement office in November when he had asked her how long she expected to stay. She had said it the way she said everything practical, which was as a statement of fact rather than a commitment, and the fact was this: she stayed until the need was resolved, and when the need was resolved, she left. And the leaving was not a failure of the arrangement but the completion of it, and she had been completing arrangements this way for 6 years, and the completing was the thing she was good at. Seld had written it in the ledger as indefinite, which was the closest the placement ledger had to a category for what she did, which was to arrive in a household and address the specific condition that had brought the household to the placement office and then depart when the condition was addressed. She had been in 9 arrangements in 6 years, and she had departed each one correctly, and each one had been better for her having been in it. And the departure was part of the design. His name was Pell Aldrin, and he had been running the Aldrin spread on the North Callaway Range for 9 years, and he was 42, and he had been managing the operation alone since his wife had gone to her sister in Callaway 2 years ago, which had begun as a visit and had become something longer and then something permanent. And the permanent arrangement had left the house without the domestic management his wife had provided and the operation without the second pair of eyes that the operation had been built around, and both absences had been accumulating for 2 years in the specific way that absences accumulated, which was invisibly at first and then in the form of deferred things that were each small and together were not small. He had gone to Seld not because he was at a crisis, but because he was a practical man who could see the trajectory of a thing before it reached the crisis. And the trajectory of the Aldrin spread without domestic management and without a second pair of eyes was the trajectory of a working operation being slowly reduced by deferred attention. He did not want to arrive at the crisis and then address it. He wanted to address the trajectory. Seld had offered him Iris Vane. Her name was Iris Vane, and she was 34, and she arrived at the Aldrin spread on a Monday in November, with a bag that was organized the way a person organized a bag who knew how long she was going to be in each place, which was to say it was organized for a medium-length stay, not the minimal packing of a person who expected to be somewhere for 2 weeks, and not the fuller packing of a person who was settling in, but the middle quantity of a person who had learned to read how long a household needed her before she arrived and had packed accordingly. The 6 years had produced a knowledge she had not expected when she started, which was a knowledge of the specific geometry of need in working households and operations. She knew how long it took to address a supply problem if the problem was organizational rather than categorical. She knew how long an accounts reorganization took if the previous system had been adequate but wrong rather than simply neglected. She knew the difference between a household that needed 3 weeks and one that needed 6, and she could usually read the difference in the first 2 days by the kind of questions the person asked when she showed them what she had found. What she also knew from 6 years and 9 arrangements was how to leave correctly, which was as important as knowing how to arrive. She had seen other people in similar positions stay too long, past the point of need and into the territory of dependency, and the staying too long produced a specific kind of damage that was harder to address than the original problem, because it was invisible and grew slowly, and was the kind of damage that the person who caused it often could not see. She did not stay too long. She left when the need was resolved, and she left cleanly, and the leaving was the last part of the work, and she was good at it. She had told Seld she would stay until Pell Aldrin didn't need her anymore, and she had meant it as a practical statement rather than a romantic one, and it was a practical statement, and she intended to honor it in the same way she had honored 8 times before. He met her at the door, and he showed her the house and the supply room and the accounts and the kitchen, and she asked 2 questions at the end of the showing, which were, what was the most urgent condition, and what was the condition that had been deferred the longest. He said the most urgent was the supply arrangements, which had been running on the previous management system and were no longer suited to a household of 1 rather than 2. And the condition that had been deferred the longest was the account organization, which had been adequate when his wife had been managing it and had become gradually less adequate over 2 years of his managing it alone. Not because he was incompetent at accounts, but because the accounts system had been built for her and he had been using a system built for someone else's mind. She said she would address the supply first and the accounts second, and she would tell him when both were resolved. He said that sounded right. She said she expected to be done in 4 weeks. He said he would take 4 weeks. She began. The supply was resolved in the first week. She had reorganized supply systems before, in other arrangements, and she had a practiced eye for the specific inefficiencies that a household of 2 management system produced when applied to a household of 1, which were predictable and addressable, and she addressed them. The reorganization required 2 days of reading the current system, and 1 day of implementing the new one, and 1 day of documenting the implementation. And the 4 days produced a monthly saving that she documented and left on the desk with the specific note that the saving was approximately $14 per month and was achievable without changing the quality or quantity of the household supplies. He read the documentation and he said it was good work, and he said $14 per month was more than he had expected. She said it usually was. She said the surprising thing about household supply efficiency was not the individual savings, but the accumulated effect over a year, which was a different number than most people had in mind when they thought about the supply arrangements, and most people thought about the supply arrangements as a fixed cost rather than as a variable one. He said he had not thought about it that way. She said most people didn't until someone showed them, and once they saw it, they could maintain it themselves. He said, was that the point? She said yes. She said the point was always to leave the system in the condition that the person could maintain it without her, because a system that required her to be there to function was not a system, but a dependency, and dependencies were liabilities. He said she was very precise about this. She said she had been doing it for 6 years, and precision was what 6 years of doing something correctly produced. He said was, she always leaving. She said she was always leaving when the work was done. He looked at her, and he said he was moving to the accounts. She said she was moving to the accounts. He said she had said the point was to leave the system in the condition that the person could maintain it without her. She said yes. He said, what if the system was more complex than one person could maintain adequately on their own? She said she would document it thoroughly enough that the person understood the system even if they could not maintain it perfectly, and the understanding would allow them to notice when it needed attention and seek help at that point. He said so she built in the knowledge of when to get help. She said yes. She said that was part of what the documentation was for. He said that was a very complete approach. She said 6 years. He said 6 years. She went to the accounts. The accounts took longer than the supply. The accounts system his wife had built was genuinely good. It was not inadequate. It was simply organized around her mind rather than his. And the difference between a system organized around one mind and a system organized around a different mind was not a quality difference, but a usability difference. And usability differences were the most time-consuming to address because they required understanding both minds before you could produce a system that would work for the current one. Understanding his mind required watching him work, which she did for the first 3 days of the accounts work before she changed anything. She watched how he engaged with the existing documents, what he reached for first, how he organized information when he wrote things down, in what order he processed the figures when he reviewed them. And what she found was that his mind worked from the operational outward rather than from the administrative inward, which was the opposite of the system his wife had built, and the opposition was the source of the usability gap. His wife had organized the accounts to make the administrative picture clear first and the operational implications clear second. He needed the operational picture clear first. It was a small difference in architecture and a significant difference in daily use, and she rebuilt the system accordingly. She spent 3 weeks on the accounts, which was 2 weeks longer than her initial estimate, which she noted in her own records as a calibration for future estimates in similar situations. She also noted something else in her records, which she had been noting since the second week, which was that Pell Aldrin was the most honest person she had been in an arrangement with in 6 years. Not in the sense that others had been dishonest, but in the sense that he said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. And the exactly what he meant had been consistent across every interaction she had observed, and the consistency was the thing she found most notable, because consistency in saying the accurate thing was rarer than honesty in any given instance, and was the quality she had been looking for, without knowing she was looking for it, in 9 arrangements over 6 years. At the end of the 3 weeks, she had produced an accounts system organized around his mind, and she brought it to him and she walked him through it, and he asked 2 questions, and the 2 questions were the questions she would have predicted from 4 weeks of watching him, which were the questions that went directly to the operational implications rather than starting at the administrative beginning. He said it was very good. She said she would be leaving at the end of the week. He said he understood. He said there was one more thing. She said she was listening. He said the east pasture rotation had been running on the same pattern for 3 years, and he had been meaning to assess whether the pattern was still optimal, and he had not had time to assess it. And he was not asking her to stay to do it, but he was noting it because she had been here for 4 weeks and had eyes on the spread, and he thought her assessment of the east pasture rotation might be useful, and he did not want to waste it by not asking. She looked at him for a moment. She said she would look at the east pasture rotation before she left. He said he would appreciate it. She went to the east pasture. She came back the following day with a finding, which was that the east pasture rotation was not simply suboptimal, but was producing a grazing pressure pattern that was going to require remediation work in the spring if the pattern continued through the winter. And the remediation work was not complex, but was time-consuming, and the time-consuming was the kind that displaced other work, and preventing it was simpler than remedying it. She had seen the same pattern in 2 previous arrangements, and she knew the specific adjustment required, and she knew it would hold. She said the adjustment was straightforward and would take her 2 days to implement and document. He said he would be grateful. She said she would be leaving after the 2 days. He said he understood. She spent 2 days on the adjustment, implementing it correctly and documenting the implementation clearly enough that he could continue it without her, which was the standard she held herself to in every arrangement. The documentation was sufficient for the work to survive her departure. This is Dusty Vows, where I'll stay until he doesn't need me anymore became the most honest thing either of them ever said. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to the spread. At the end of the 2 days, she said she was leaving at the end of the week. He said he understood. He said there was something he wanted to tell her before she left. She said she was listening. He said he had been watching her work for 5 weeks, and he had a question that was not about the work. She said she was still listening. He said she had told Seld she would stay until he didn't need her anymore, and she had addressed the supply and the accounts and found the east pasture problem, and he was asking whether the plan still applied. She said the plan always applied. He said what was the plan exactly. She said the plan was to stay until the need was resolved and to leave when it was. He said, and was the need resolved? She was quiet for a moment. She said the supply was resolved and the accounts were resolved and the east pasture adjustment was resolved, and she had addressed the 3 conditions that had required addressing, and the spread was in better shape than when she had arrived. He said yes. She said she was leaving at the end of the week. He said he had one more thing. She said she was starting to notice a pattern. He said he knew. He said he was going to say the one more thing anyway. She said she was listening. He said the north boundary water access had been flagged in the county records 2 years ago as needing formal resolution, and he had been meaning to address it and had not, and it was the kind of thing that was not urgent until it became urgent, and then it was very urgent. And he thought she had the kind of reading background that would make the relevant county documents legible, and he was asking. She looked at him for a long moment. She said she would look at the county documents. Tell me, when she said she was starting to notice a pattern, did you hear that she was also saying she was not leaving? That the noticing was the permission she was giving herself to stay? She could have said no. She said she was starting to notice a pattern, which was a woman letting herself be interested in the pattern. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to the spread. She looked at the county documents. The north boundary water access question was more complicated than she had expected, which was the case with most county document situations that had been deferred for 2 years. Because deferral in county document situations usually meant that the complication was the reason for the deferral, and the complication had not simplified itself in the meantime. The documents in this case were layered: a county survey record from 11 years prior, a subsequent amendment to that survey, 2 letters from adjacent property holders that had been filed as objections, and a county clerk's notation indicating the matter was pending further documentation. The pending further documentation notation was the source of the ongoing obligation, and the further documentation required was specific and locatable, and she found it in the relevant county regulation after 2 days of reading. She spent a week reading the relevant records and produced a summary of what needed to be done and in what order, which was 3 steps. First, file the pending documentation with the correct county office. Second, notify the adjacent property holders of the filing. Third, request the county clerk to close the pending notation. The summary was organized for action rather than for reference, because the people who needed summaries were people who needed to act, not people who needed to understand the full history. She left the summary on the desk. He read the summary, and he said it was thorough. She said she was leaving at the end of the week. He said there was one more thing. She said, Pell. He said yes. He said the one more thing was that the county document situation required a follow-up filing within 30 days, and the filing required someone who could read the relevant legal sections accurately and produce the documentation in the format the county required. And she was the only person in his current acquaintance who had demonstrated the ability to do this, and he was not asking her to stay. He was noting it. She said noting it was a form of asking. He said he knew. He said he was being honest about the situation. He said the situation was that the filing needed to happen within 30 days and the filing required skills she had, and he did not. And he had mentioned it because he was honest about what the situation required and not because he was strategizing to extend her stay. She said she knew he was being honest. She said that was the thing she had been noticing most clearly in the 7 weeks she had been here, which was that he said the accurate thing about the situation rather than the convenient thing, and the accurate thing had been consistently that there was more work to do. He said there was more work to do. She said she knew. He said, was that a problem? She said she was still determining that. She said she would stay for the filing. He said he appreciated it. She said she was leaving after the filing. He said he understood. She stayed for the filing. The filing was completed in 2 weeks, and she put the receipt on the desk, and she said she was leaving at the end of the week. He said he understood. He said there was one more thing. She put down the pen she was holding, and she looked at him. He said the spring herd assessment was in 6 weeks, and the assessment required the kind of systematic record-keeping that had been his wife's contribution to the operation, and he had been doing it alone for 2 years, and the doing it alone had produced a record that was complete, but was not as useful as a record produced by 2 people who each checked the other's counts. She said she had been in 9 arrangements in 6 years. He said he knew. She said in each arrangement she had stayed until the need was resolved and had left when it was resolved. He said he knew. She said each time she had been here a new need had appeared. He said he knew. He said he was aware that this was not a coincidence, but he wanted her to know that each need was genuine. He said he had not been finding needs to report in order to prevent her from leaving, because finding needs to prevent someone from leaving was a form of deception, and he did not deceive, and she had been here long enough to have evidence of that. He said the needs had been genuine in each case, and he had reported them because he was honest about the situation, and the situation was that the spread had more conditions requiring attention than he had been able to address alone, and her presence had been revealing them. He said he was also aware that the honest reporting of genuine needs had produced the same effect as a strategy to keep her here would have produced, which was that she had stayed, and he was not going to pretend the effect was different from a strategy just because the cause was different. She looked at him. She said that was a very precise thing to say. He said he tried to be precise. She said she had been in 9 arrangements in 6 years, and in none of them had the person she was working for been this precise about the distinction between honesty and strategy, and she had found the distinction difficult to maintain her usual departure plan around. He said he had noticed. She said she was going to ask him something directly. He said she should ask it. She said she had been here for 9 weeks and she had addressed the supply and the accounts and the east pasture and the county documents and the filing, and she was being asked to stay for the spring herd assessment, and she wanted to know when the needs were going to stop. Because she had been doing this for 6 years, and she knew that all operations reached a state of adequate maintenance, eventually, and she wanted to know if he believed that day was coming. He was quiet for a long time. He said he had been thinking about that question since the 3rd week. She said, and. He said the honest answer was that the needs were going to keep coming, not because the spread required them, but because she was here. And her being here revealed things that her absence would have left unrevealed. And the revealing was the property of her specific way of looking at things, and if she left, the revealing would stop. And if the revealing stopped, the needs would stop appearing, and the stopping of the appearing was not the same as the stopping of the existing. She said so the needs would stop when she left. He said the visible needs would stop. He said the actual needs would continue to exist and would accumulate until they reached a threshold, which was the same trajectory the spread had been on before she arrived. She said he was saying that the day would come when she stopped being needed, but the day would come because she had left rather than because the spread was adequately maintained. He said yes. He said that was the accurate description. She said she had been working for 6 years on the premise that the day would come when the work was done and she would leave and the leaving would be the completion of the work, and he was telling her the premise was not accurate for this particular arrangement. He said he was telling her what the accurate description was. He said she could do what she wanted to do with the accurate description. She was quiet. She said she had a question. He said he was listening. She said when he had been honest about each need as it appeared, had he been honest about them because he needed them addressed or because he was being honest? He said both. He said each need was real, and he had been honest about it, and the honesty was not separate from the need. He would have reported the needs whether or not she was there, because he was honest about the situation regardless of the audience. He said the difference was that when she was there, he had someone to report to, and when she was not there, he would have been noting them in his own records and deferring them until he could address them himself. and the noting and deferring was the trajectory she had interrupted. She said, so he needed her there to address the things that were being revealed. He said yes. She said, and if she stayed, she would keep revealing more things. He said, probably yes. She said, and if she left, the revealing would stop. He said, yes. She said, so the only way the day would come when he didn't need her anymore was if she left. He said yes. He said that was the accurate description. He said he was aware it was an uncomfortable description. She said it was not uncomfortable. She said it was clarifying. He said, what did it clarify? She said it clarified that the plan she had arrived with, to stay until he didn't need her anymore, was a plan that could not be honored as originally understood, because the not needing was a function of her absence rather than of the completion of the work. He said yes. She said so she needed a different plan. He said he thought so. She said, what did he think the different plan should be? He said her name. Iris, sighed the first time with the full weight of it, said the way a name sounded when it had been the name of the person who addressed the supply and the accounts and the east pasture and the county filing, and who had just completed the most precise accounting of a situation that he had heard in 9 weeks of precise accounting. She waited. I'm not going anywhere. He said it the way he said the accurate thing, which was plainly and as a statement of the situation rather than as a performance of a feeling, because he was a man who said the accurate thing, and the accurate thing here was that he was not going anywhere, and she should not go anywhere, and the plan she needed to replace the plan she had arrived with was the plan where neither of them went anywhere. He held her gaze. You said you would stay until I didn't need you anymore, and I have been honest about every need since you arrived, and the honest thing I have not said until now is that I am going to keep needing you. And not because the spread requires it, and not because I am manufacturing the needs, and not because I am going to keep finding things, but because you are here, and the here is different from the before you, and I do not want the before you back, and that is the accurate description, as if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Pell Aldrin. Her name for him said the way a name sounded when it had been the name of the man who kept finding one more thing and who had just said the thing underneath all the other things, which was the thing that had been the actual situation since approximately the 3rd week. She nodded once. The matter was settled. The supply was organized, and the accounts were correct, and the east pasture was adjusted, and the county filing receipt was on the desk, and the spring herd assessment was 6 weeks away. And Iris Vane was at the Aldrin spread, and she was not going anywhere. She had said she would stay until he didn't need her anymore, and the staying had extended through 9 weeks of supply and accounts and east pasture and county documents and filing, and the extending had been legitimate each time because each need had been real. And the legitimate extending had been the mechanism, but not the cause. And the cause was that she had been here, and here was different from not here, and the different was the thing that neither of them had named until tonight. The plan she had arrived with had been the right plan for 8 previous arrangements, and was the wrong plan for this one. And the wrongness was not a failure of the plan, but a feature of the arrangement, which was that this arrangement was not the kind that completed, and the not completing was not a problem with the work and was not a problem with the spread, it was the thing itself. And the thing itself was that she was here and he was here and neither of them was going anywhere. And the spring herd assessment was in 6 weeks. And the spring herd assessment was done better by 2 people who each checked the other's counts. And they were 2 people, and both of them were staying. The honest man had been honest about every need from the supply to the accounts to the east pasture to the county filing to the spring herd assessment, and the honest reporting had produced 9 weeks of legitimate staying. And the legitimate staying had produced tonight, and tonight had produced the accurate description, and the accurate description was that neither of them was going anywhere. and the plan had changed, and the new plan was this, and both of them were in it. And the Aldrin spread was in the best condition it had been in since before his wife had gone to Callaway, and the condition was going to keep improving, because there were two of them now, and two people who each checked the other's counts produced better records than one, and Iris Vane was not going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying. She had arrived with 9 arrangements of experience and a bag packed for a medium-length stay, and a plan she had used 8 times, and a statement she had made to Seld that she would stay until he didn't need her anymore, and she was staying, and the plan was complete. Because the plan had always been to stay until the situation was resolved, and the situation was resolved. And the resolution was this, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the spring was coming, and the herd assessment was 6 weeks away, and the honest man was at the desk, and she was staying. The day she had said she would leave when it came was the day that had never come, because the honest man had been honest, and the honesty had kept producing the accurate description of the situation. And the accurate description of the situation had been that there was more work to do, and the more work was real, and the reality of the more work had kept her here through supply and accounts and East pasture and county documents and filing and the approaching spring herd assessment. And the here had become the thing she had not planned to be, which was a place she intended to stay in rather than a place she was working toward leaving, and the intending to stay was the completion of the arrangement, which was a different kind of completion from the ones she had been making for 6 years, and a better kind, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were in it, and Iris Vane was not going anywhere, and Pell Aldrin was not going anywhere, and the Aldrin spread was sound, and the spring herd assessment was going to be done by 2 people, and the 2 people were both staying. She had said she would stay until he didn't need her anymore, and the day had not come, and it was not going to come, and the not coming was not a deception, and was not a strategy. It was the accurate description of what a working operation required, and what a person who was good at her work produced when she was present, which was the continuous revelation of the next thing. And the next thing was always real, and the real things were going to keep coming, and she was going to keep being here for them, and both of them were staying, and the spring was coming, and the herd assessment was in 6 weeks, and the 2 of them were going to be there for it, and for everything that followed, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled. And that was the whole arithmetic, and it was correct. Seld's ledger had the placement listed as indefinite, which was the closest category the ledger had to what she did, and indefinite was the right word, because indefinite was what it had become, not because the work was never done, but because the work was the kind of work that 2 people did together in a working operation on the North Callaway Range, and the together was the new condition. And the condition was good, and the supply was organized, and the accounts were in the right format, and the East pasture rotation was adjusted, and the county filing was on record, and the spring herd assessment was going to be done by 2 people who checked each other's counts, and neither of them was going anywhere, and Iris Vane was staying, and the honest man was at the desk. And the matter was settled, and the day had not come and was not going to come, and both of them were entirely fine with that, and both of them were staying. She had been good at leaving for 6 years, and the goodness at leaving had come from the precision of the work and the completeness of the documentation and the correctness of the timing. And all of those qualities were still present and were now in service of a different outcome, which was staying, and the staying was its own kind of precision and its own kind of completeness and its own kind of timing, and the timing was now. And the now was the Aldrin spread in November, with the supply organized, and the accounts correct, and the East pasture adjusted, and the county documents filed, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the spring was going to come, and the herd assessment was going to be done, and both of them were going to be there for all of it, and the matter was settled, and it was correct, and both of them were staying, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the spring herd assessment was in 6 weeks, and both of them were going to be there for it, and for all of the assessments after it. and the matter was completely settled, and the spring was outside, and the accounts were correct, and both of them were in it, and neither of them was going anywhere at all, and the spring was coming, and both of them were staying.